Today I'll be showing you how to make this chunky knit stress ball buddy. The supplies you'll need are chunky blanket yarn. You can get this from Hobby Lobby, JOANN, Walmart, Michales. This is jumbo size 7. You'll need a pair of scissors and some poly-fil. So you'll need a color of your choosing for the stress ball buddy and then some black yarn for the eyes. To begin, you will need to create a slip knot. You'll want to leave about 6 to 8 inches of tail yarn and start your slip knot over here. To create a slip knot, cross over your yarn so you create a loop, and then put your thumb and pointer finger through that loop, and then take your working yarn, and with your working yarn between your pointer finger and thumb, grab that working yarn and pull up a loop through. And then with your tail yarn, just pull on that as you're holding the new loop that you created and pull to tighten it. So my loop is about 3 fingers wide. I want it to be about 2 fingers wide. So to tighten it, you are just going to take your working yarn and hold at the base of the slip knot, right where the knot is, and pull to make it a bit smaller. And now my loop is about 2 fingers wide. So this counts as my first loop. For my stress ball buddy, I like to chain on a total of 7 loops. If you want to make a smaller stress ball or a little bit of a bigger stress ball, you can chain on 6 or 8. Now that I have my first loop, I need to chain on 6 more loops to create a 7 loop chain. So again, I'm going to take my thumb and my pointer, I'm going to put that through my first loop, and then I'm going to, with my working yarn, pull up another loop, and then I just like to straighten it out. So this is 2 loops, and I have 5 more to go. So again, putting my pointer and thumb through that last loop that I did, take my working yarn and pull up another loop and straighten it out. And you're just going to keep going until you have 7. If you lose count, you can always count backwards. So I have 1 loop here, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can always pull on it slightly to see where your loops are. This is number 5, 6, and 7. And again, you can always count back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so now that I have my chain completed, I am now going to create a circle. So this is where I'm going to take my tail yarn and I am going to bring it over to that last loop that I created and put this tail yarn right where my pointer finger is right now through that loop. So take your tail yarn, push that through, and then tighten until you create your circle right where that slip knot is. Okay, so at this point I have my tail yarn and my working yarn pointing away from me. I have my tail yarn hanging down, and then I'm going to pick up my working yarn. So we are going to work in a clockwise direction, and we are going to bring up new loops. So my working yarn here is through this loop. I am going to go 1 over here. I'm going to put my finger through that next loop over, and then I'm going to grab my working yarn with that finger to pull up a loop. Make sure your loops are about 2 fingers wide. So there's my first loop up, and now I'm just going to go 1 over again to that next loop, again working in a clockwise direction around the circle. I'm going to put my finger through that next loop over, and with my working yarn I am going to pull up another loop. Make sure your loops are all about the same size as you're going around. Okay, so I'm going to go another loop over, pull up that loop, and I have 3 loops up. So just go all the way around your circle, pulling loops up, and now as you are doing this, your circle is going to be flipping inside out, which is great, that's what you want it to do. Pull up another loop until you hit your slip knot and your tail yarn. So my tail yarn is now facing upwards. It's a little bit hard to tell on the camera, but this right here is my slip knot that I started with. You are not going to pull a loop up through the slip knot, since of course you can't get your finger through that knot. So you're going to go 1 over to the next loop, which is where your tail yarn is pulled through. So with your tail yarn, just pull that down into the center of your circle. Just push it down and pull that through so it's now facing down. Okay, so here is your slip knot. Go 1 over to your next loop where your tail yarn is through and just pull up another loop, and then I like to just straighten that out. Now your last loop is, instead of pointing side to side, it's facing inwards. So just take that next loop, give it a little twist so it's now facing side to side like the rest of the loops were, and pull up your last loop. So at this point you should have 7 loops up, so just go ahead and count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so that is row 2. Your chain row counts as row 1, and then this was our second row. So we are going to go up a total of 7 rows, so that means I have to go up 5 more rows to complete the body of my stress ball buddy. So this is really easy and repetitive at this point. Once you get the first 2 rows down, the rest should be fairly easy. So go ahead and put that finger into the next loop. So this is the last loop that I did. This is my working yarn. I'm going 1 over and pulling that loop up through. And again, make sure that your loops are all about the same size as you're working your way around. Feel free to pause the video if you need to catch up, or you can always rewind as you need. You can always slow down the video and rewatch as many times as you need. The loops can easily be pulled out, so you can easily start over, and you can just keep working and practicing this until you get each step down. The more you do this, the more you're going to get into the rhythm of pulling the loops up and through. So don't get discouraged if you feel like you're not going fast right now. The more you do it, the faster and the better you will do. Okay, so if you lose count on how many rows up you have done, if you look where your tail yarn is, and then if you go straight up, this is the second to last loop. Once you are in line with that tail yarn, you know that you have to go 1 over to complete the row. So I've already gone 1 over past that loop, and then you can just go ahead and count down to see how many rows you are at. So it's just 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, you can just separate the yarn to see the separation of each row or loop. So I'm going into row 5, and I'm just going to keep going until I complete 7 rows. Okay, so I am lined up with my tail again, so I know I have to go one more loop to complete the row. And then I'm just going to count backwards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I just have one more row to go before I complete my 7 rows. Okay, so there is my 7th row. The body of the stress ball is done. And now I'm just going to take my working yarn. I am just going to cut so there's about 8 inches left. Okay, so now the body of my stress ball is done and I'm going to move on to the eyes. Now, of course, if you don't want to add the eyes, you can just skip the eye part and move along to closing the bottom and top, and then you can just have a regular stress ball instead of having a stress ball buddy, since I think adding the eyes makes it a little buddy. Okay, so take your black yarn or any color that you chose for the eyes, and you are going to cut 6 to 8 inches in length, and you're going to cut 2 of those. So that's 1 and that's 2. So you should have 2 strands of yarn. And then what you're going to do is just create a regular knot right at the center of the yarn. So just make a knot, pull so it's right at the center, and do the same thing with the other piece of yarn. Okay, so here are my 2 eyes, and now let's do the placement. Okay, so it doesn't really matter where on your stress ball you do any side, and then I am going to be working with this stitch here. So here we have stitches, we have 1, 2, 3. So if you go around, there will be 7 stitches. I am going to put an eye right in the middle of this stitch here, and I'm just going to do it about in the middle. So I'm going back behind here on the inside of the stress ball. I'm going to poke my finger where I want it, right in between that stitch, or in the middle of the stitch. I'm going to poke my one side of the yarn through there and pull until it hits the knot that we created, and then I'm going to go just one above. So there's a piece of yarn right here. That's where the knot or the eye is going to sit, and then I just put my finger here so I know where I'm going. I'm going to take the other side of my black piece of yarn and poke that through and pull it from the inside, so that way that eyeball is, or the knot is right in the middle. So that is my first eye. You can always move the eye up higher if you would like, or lower, whatever you prefer. And then I'm going to go 1 stitch over. So here's the 1 stitch that my eye is sitting in the middle of. Here is my next stitch, and instead of going in the middle of the stitch, I'm going to go in between these 2 stitches right here, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pull my eye through until it hits that knot, and then I'm just going to go 1 strand of yarn above it and pull that through. Okay. So my eyes are uneven, so I can either move this eye up 1 or I can move this eye down 1. I think I'm going to move this eye up 1, so I'm going to take the bottom strand out, and then I'm just going to move it upward. So I'm going to go in between where that strand of yarn is right there, pull it over top where my finger was just sticking out, and now they are even. So if you wanted to, you can always move this eye closer and go in between the stitch like we did here, or you can move it further out. It really is up to you how you prefer your eyes to sit on your stress ball. So once you have your eyes placed, you're going to go on the inside of the stress ball, and you're going to take the 2 strands of yarn that are attached to this one eye. You're just going to do a triple knot at the back of the eye, which you can't see me doing, but I'm just doing a triple knot on the inside of the stress ball with the 2 same strands. Okay, so I've done a triple knot with this one. I'm going to go over here and also do a triple knot, making sure I'm grabbing the 2 pieces of black yarn that are attached to this one eye. Okay. Okay, so my eyes are all set, and now I'm going to close up the bottom of the stress ball. So here's my bottom. I'm going to be working in a clockwise direction, taking my tail yarn. I'm going to find the next loop to the right of that tail yarn right here. I'm going to go from the outside of the stress ball to the inside. That's the way that I am pulling the yarn. And then I am just going to tighten it. And then going over to the next one, I'm just going to continue to pull that tail yarn through each of these loops all the way around the circle, going from the outside of the stress ball towards the inside. So I'm starting from the outside and I'm pulling it towards the inside to begin. Tighten. I wrap my hands between the loop that I just pulled the tail yarn through, and then tighten it slightly. And then just go all the way around until you hit that last loop. That's my last loop. Now I'm just going to create a knot at the base of the tail yarn, like so. And then I'm going to go and find the middle of the circle that I just closed up. So I'm just putting my hands through just the gaps of the stress ball. And then I found the center of my circle, and I'm just going to poke my tail yarn through that center, and I'm going to pop the knot also into the middle as well. Okay, so the bottom is closed up, and then before I close up the top, I'm just going to stuff it with some poly-fil. These stress balls only use a little bit of poly-fil, which is great. Go ahead and just tuck it in around all of the sides. And then for the top of the stress ball buddy, you're going to take what was your working yarn, and then you're going to be working in a counterclockwise direction this time. And then instead of going from the outside to the inside, you're going to go from the inside to the outside. So take your piece of yarn, go to the next loop over, push that yarn through, and then pull it towards the outside, going from the inside to the outside. And then once I do about 3 loops through, I'm going to go back to this loop here. I'm going to put my thumb through there to make sure that this loop doesn't slip out as I pull to tighten. So just tighten a little bit, and then continue to go around the circle, going from the inside to the outside. Okay, I have 2 more, so I'm just going to put my thumb in that last loop so it doesn't slip out as I pull it to tighten. And then at this point I'm just going to do the last 2 loops. And then once you get that last loop in, just go ahead and tighten it all the way. And then same thing, you are going to create a knot at the base of this piece of yarn. And then go ahead and find the center of that circle that you just closed up, which is right here for me. Take that piece of yarn and just put it all the way through and including that knot. Okay, all right. And there's your stress ball buddy. You can go ahead and shape it. So here are the stress ball buddies. I hope you enjoy this tutorial. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments and I will be happy to get back to you. Feel free to share your creations of your stress ball buddies with me by tagging me in your stories or Instagram post. Just tag me as Sab Steffies, or I'm also on Facebook as well. I always love seeing your creations, so I hope you guys love this tutorial.